Welcome to Play Pause Turn. In this podcast, we discuss all things to do with TV, films, games and literature. We give our thoughts on the media we've been enjoying, old or new, and comment on anything topical. And welcome. And this is an interesting episode because you named this one, Alex, and I quite like the name of this one. It's got many depths to it. So this episode is called This Film is Rated Eternal, and I think I know what you're getting at here. One particular scene in the film, which we're going to talk about in the spoiler section. We are talking about the film Eternals. Alex and I have both seen it. Between us, it's been watched 3 times, I gather.
Yes, that's right.
But as usual, before we start talking about that, we're going to have our usual icebreaker intro question. And Alex, the question is, if you were an Eternal, what would be your eternal power?
So we've done superpowers already.
We have, yeah.
So I didn't want to cover the same stuff again. So we'll leave my dad bod out of it.
Okay. Please do.
But I just thought to myself, what would work well for me? Because what I realised is that when we'll talk through the characters of Eternals a bit more later. But what I realised is that there isn't a massive amount of sort of smarts or technology. It's generally there's one person that does the technology, and that's it.
Yeah.
So I think my ability would be someone who could recommend retro tech that is no longer available. So whenever they're in a scene, they have to say, "Oh, this is perfect because this goes really well on my Betamax," or "Oh, this is perfect. I play that on my 45 and works really nicely." Yeah. And so I feel like that would give it a bit more charm. So
play this on my 45. I'm not sure how many people are listening to this one. You could say play this on my 33 and a third as well, couldn't you? Really, if you're going that far
yeah,
back.
that would have been a better quote actually, but yeah.
Okay, yeah. For me, I long for uninterrupted sleep, Alex.
Right.
So I think all I'd like to be able to do is to make everybody else in the world go to sleep, so that I could just have a long lie-in without anyone spoiling it, whether it's my son getting out of bed at 5:30, like he does every morning, or the bin men coming, or someone knocking on the front door, or anything. So then I could just have a nice long lie-in and get a really good night's sleep.
Okay.
You know what happened though? I don't know.
Sounds
Watching something late at night so I can have a longer lie-in and it will go wrong. But yeah.
You would, yeah.
Okay, so as you've already heard, this episode we're going to be giving our thoughts on the latest Marvel film, the 26th Marvel film, The Eternals. Is it The Eternals or Eternals?
I think it's just Eternals, yeah. No,
and it's an interesting one for us to both go into, I think, because have you read any of the comics, Alex?
So I haven't. Yeah, I came into this completely fresh. I knew there were comics, but I didn't watch any of them, and it didn't taint any of my view of Eternals, to be honest. So, it just seemed like a good premise to watch. So it wasn't just I'll watch this for Marvel. It was this sounds interesting. I wonder what they're going to do with that.
I mean, there is a certain amount of Marvel kudos. Oh, it's the next Marvel film. Let's go and watch it. And I think, that's they can just bankroll a lot of their films based on that, can't they, these days?
I don't think DC would have got away with that.
No. Although, if you look at the characters in Eternals, you've got one that can fly, super strong, and shoots rays from his eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you've got one that can heal. You've got one that's kind of like a sort of Greek warrior queen goddess. Sound familiar? You've got one that can run really quickly.
Yeah.
You've got the one that's kind of gadgets into the gadgets and rebuilding things. And
yeah, there's a sort of compassionate one that can change things, which is interesting. But really, if she's the thoughtful one, then that could So there's a lot of crossover there.
Yeah, and I think that's because the film is based on these were old Jack Kirby characters, weren't they? The Eternals. I mean, he imagined this sort of spanning this sort of 7,000 years, and the comics just go. You've got a lot of material there, really, haven't you, for writing comics? No, I've never read them, and again, part of the clever sort of business sense of Marvel is that people are now going to go out there and read the comics, I imagine, and go back and check the back catalogue. this sort of eternal money loop they're going to make out of this.
Yeah.
There's also I discovered in my research there's actually a 2014 TV cartoon series about the Eternals.
Really, I didn't know that.
So I the usual IMDb search gave me two options for Eternals, and it kind of took me down like a rabbit hole there. But if there's any way of viewing them, I'd quite like to see what they're all about. I mean, the synopsis was very similar to the story of this film here. But let's talk about the new film, and we're not going to spoil anything straight away. Before we do go into spoilers, Alex, overall, how did you feel about the film? And did you see it at the cinema, or did you see it at home?
So I watched it at the cinema.
Can you see it at home? I'm not sure you can at the moment.
No, it's not on streaming yet. I did, after watching it, I was like, great, I wonder if I can pick this up. No, of course you can't. So whereas we've been spoilt with a couple of cases where it went on Premier Access like quickly.
Yeah.
But I think we've kind of forgot that actually it's only been out about 3 weeks, so it's not been out very long at all.
No.
But yeah, so yes, so overall I did enjoy it, and I think it's a qualified yes, but don't let that put you off. So it is a complex film. It covers a lot of time over 7,000 years, but it's done very well, and although it has a long run time, it's still an engaging watch. So I would recommend it to watch, but it's not Marvel's strongest. I mean,
yeah, I agree with you. I enjoyed it too. Do you feel that perhaps people will go in thinking, I need to watch this to stay informed in the whole Marvel continuation, the loop of all their characters? Because there are, there's the same knowing nods at the end to new films, and we'll talk about that later on. I mean, anyone, even if you haven't seen it, you've got to know that they're always going to hint at the next film at the end of each of these films.
Yes, I think you'll want to see it.
Yeah,
but I think and I do think that Marvel can get away with that a bit. And I think it is an interesting premise, but the challenge is that it's also one that for most of the viewers will be completely new to them. So there isn't anything existing to build on.
I think they almost made a bit of a rod for them back with the Avengers films, and knew they had to keep that kind of story arc going. And I like what they're trying to do here, where they're making easily watchable standalone films, even though they do have these links to other characters and stories. Like Shang-Chi was a very good example of that. I did enjoy it, and I didn't know going in that it was the second longest Marvel film of all of them.
It didn't feel the longest, to be honest. It didn't.
No, I mean, I looked at my watch at the end and thought, oh, blimey, I'm going to be coming home a lot later than I promised my wife. But I enjoyed the calmness of it. It did feel epic. It felt, you were going through the ages. And there were some fun concepts. And there's, I kind of wish, it depends on the source material here, I wish there was a lot more kind of, so they were there at that time, and that's the reason that happened in history. I'd like to see a bit more of that, because that's quite fun, and people like that in history. In fact, if you like history in films, there's a good YouTube channel called History Buffs, which goes into the whole historical aspects of films, worth watching. And I imagine they'll probably look at this and have a go at this as well. But I enjoyed it. I would recommend it. At the same time, I don't think it's a problem if you wait and watch it whenever it comes to the streaming service, to Disney Plus, because it will eventually, obviously, probably over Christmas, I imagine. But no, definitely, I would definitely recommend it. So
I don't think it suffers from. I don't think it suffers if you watched it at home rather than watching it at the cinema. It's lovely at the cinema, and I saw it in IMAX once and normal another time, and it is nice to watch, but it's also just as good at home, with a bit of popcorn. So
I tell you what, it does. I did notice there's some. It does benefit from the Dolby experience in a cinema. There's a lot of good sort of movement, because the some of the characters jump around a lot, don't they?
Yes.
And
yeah.
And you get that kind of the sounds around you and behind you. I did enjoy that. So if you can watch it on Dolby Atmos, definitely worth doing. Yes. So we're going to spoil it now. So obviously, if you've not seen it, hold back and wait until you've seen it. So
you'll enjoy it more if you've seen it Otherwise, we don't want to put you off.
No.
So we want you to watch it and enjoy it.
That's a good point. I mean, yeah, overall, do go and see it. It's a good film. It's good fun. But obviously, because we're going to critique it and rip it apart, we're not being negative here. We're just giving our thoughts more than anything else. Speaking of which, so you're the first thing we need to look at, which I don't think it was a shock, but it felt a bit different to normal Marvel movies. This first bit, which was the exposition dump. So there's a lot of information, and I think there's a reason for that. So, what were your feelings on this?
So, it was jarring for me. It was almost like it's almost like watching the bit prologue of Blade Runner. But the thing is, with Blade Runner, I've got that whole history of understanding the storyline and why they need to condense that. Whereas here, it was brand new for me. So I was like, oh no, this isn't a great sign. Like anything that starts with a crawl, and it can't show me it physically. It has to tell me it. That's not a good sign. But as you go through the film, you understand why it's necessary, because otherwise it would be an even longer film.
Yeah.
But I do kind of prefer the ability to kind of distill stuff and then show it, because I think it works better, even if it's just a snapshot or, not snapshot, even if it's just a, I can't remember the word now. When you go back and have a look at something,
prologue.
Summary. Yeah. Even if it's just like that, or something like before the credits, for the title that kind of, just sets you in that. Oh, okay, this is happening. Right, fine. I've got that now. But it couldn't do that, and I felt like even though the start of the film tries to do that, there's so much exposition that it has to kind of hold back, and I think that's a little bit disappointing. As you go through the film, it makes more sense why this is happening, because otherwise it would, it wouldn't work as a film very well. You couldn't do it linearly, because it would end up being massively dry. For a lot of it, and then you'd be like, oh, I know what's happening now. But so I do get that, but I do find it a bit challenging, because it means that every time we're changing scenes, it's a bit like, where are we? What are we doing? And the way that they get around that is by having opportunities to keep rehashing stuff. And I felt like that was a bit of a shame.
I still think they handled the movement through time well. I mean, there are flashbacks to earlier eras, and there's some lovely kind of, oh, look at what Babylon looks like. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon looks really cool. And I like that they had that, and I think that was necessary. It almost felt the film, it's interesting, it felt like a film of two different styles in some respect, where the more modern stuff, where they're on the streets of the UK and, when they visit the Canary Islands and all that's kind of the normal standard stuff. But then you go back to, Babylon and these battles like Thermopylae or whatever it is.
That's right.
And they're very, CG heavy, and we know that.
Yes.
But they're almost two different films, and I maybe that's a sign of this massive, like this, we've got to get the story through. I think we'll talk more about that later on.
Yes.
I think the aim here is to be able to give this film to us, to people who've never heard of them, and tell a story with a satisfying plot. And I think they did do that. When we first started talking about Marvel films and the whole Marvel industry, in previous iterations of our podcast, I always felt a little bit out of my depth, especially amongst people like Mark, who's very, and I felt like this brought me in, it eased me in much more nicely. I didn't have to know about Thanos and everything else.
It didn't presume that you knew anything, and it didn't have the whole, if it's not like jumping into a Thor movie, like not Ragnarok, but maybe the one before that, and just jumping in and then going, hey, you didn't know that, you're going to struggle a bit. So I do think that they did make sure that they brought everyone into that, which was necessary, because obviously they're new characters. but I just, there were times where it literally, even in the character dialogue, it was exposition that you just felt was a bit too blatant.
Yeah.
And they've got to, they had techniques to solve that, like Thena's memory loss and things like that. But it did feel a little bit like, come on guys, keep with us because there's some cool stuff coming and we have to tell you this stuff. So I felt that it didn't detract too much, but I was conscious of it. So
let's talk about the cast. The characters in the film. And there's a lot of characters in this film.
Yes.
I think originally they were meant to be 12 superheroes, and they brought it down to 10. So
it's crazy.
They had to kind of, again, a real challenge to kind of. I think the biggest challenge is really is getting the sympathy from the viewer, from the people watching the film, to feel like you care about the characters. But who were your standout characters from the film that you really enjoyed?
So the main ones in my view that really spoke to me were Gemma Chan doing Cersei. I mean, she was really one of the key characters. Although they were all equal, hers was pretty key in the storyline. And I think she did well. I mean, the challenge is what you find is that they're all ultimately robots. Yeah. So that means that in a way they're acting, if their acting is wooden or doesn't seem to
get
grow,
away with it, can't they?
You can go, oh, that's all right, that's okay. And I almost felt like it would have been nice if Kit Harington was a robot too. But anyway, so yeah, I didn't. We shall, yeah, exactly. Yeah. We shall see. I really struggle with Angelina Jolie's role as Thena initially. And I struggle with it because I didn't empathise and really relate to the character and what the challenges that she was going through. And it took until right at the end for me to get that. And yes, there is a payoff to that, but it did. I really struggled with it because for a lot of it, I was just thinking, do you know what? She's not putting the work in. She's kind of just doing what she's asked to do. And I'm not getting any depth. Almost. Yeah. And the weird thing is when you look at Disney did some little snippets, and they were like, I can't remember what they were called, like Key Facts 101 or something.
Character studies almost.
Yeah, and they were basically little snippet, 30-second snippet, and they said Thena is often aloof, and I was like, I don't know if that's just Angelina Jolie and you've put it into the character, or whether it was the other way around. But the thing is that as you get towards the end of the film, then you do warm to her. And I think when you get to the end, it does come together and you get things like a really warm moment at the end. Yeah. And all of a sudden you just go, well, that's brilliant. I wish we had some of that earlier from her. But it is an interesting role, and I do think it's probably more challenging than some of the other roles where you just have to, read the lines and do the moves along with the CGI, and you'll be fine. So I did find it. It was an interesting role, even if it took me a very long time, to kind of really get to it.
I think she was quite committed though to the role. I mean, she was only really asked to come along as a cameo initially, and she was quite surprised at how much her character featured in the film. I think she agreed to do it because she was supporting Chloe Zhao as a sort of female director and promoting the diversity in the film. And actually, towards the end of the film process, she actually started developing her own moves for these, the battle scenes, the battle moves. So she was quite committed. But yeah, I agree with you about. I just during the film, I was looking at some of the different characters and how they were acting. Richard Madden as Icarus, and how they did seem slightly emotionless and a slightly, I mean, they when they first are revealed on Domo on the spaceship, and they come out of their little sort of pods or whatever they're doing, it felt like these are really a strange bunch of people. They seem a little bit emotionless, and I guess these are clues. I think you've also got to take into consideration anyone who lives longer than 1,000 years will go mad. Psychologically, your brain can't cope. I know they're superhuman, so I think what mayhaps they were trying to portray the kind of laissez-faire approach people would take after being alive for 7,000 years and seeing everything,
it's weird because it's
and done everything.
Yeah, but that's the thing is that they didn't bring us along that journey.
Yeah.
So what happened was that we had to guess that they'd got like this, and they didn't have a discussion. We didn't see it happening. So even with the love between Cersei and Icarus, lasting 5,000 years, which is, I think it was 5,000 years, which was certainly a long time.
A long time.
So that's a hugely long time, and yet you've got to condense that into a 1 minute montage, and it's just not enough time.
No.
And also, you then have to get this awkwardness that I found with it was, and this isn't specifically characters. We're getting to the plot and the problems with it, but then you end up with them having to say how they're feeling and not show how they're feeling.
Yeah.
So Gemma, Cersei has to say, well, you really hurt me, and it's like, but we could have seen that, and then it would have been a lot more obvious, and we would have been like, wow, this is awful for her, but we couldn't because there wasn't time.
They seemed awfully intuitive for people who've been around for such a long time. That's what I felt.
Yes.
You'd
that's
know someone,
it,
wouldn't you? After 7,000 years.
And the irony was that it was really inconsistent. So when you think about the characters, for example, you've got Icarus, who was very distant, and there may have been good reasons for that. But then you have other members that do warm. So like Gilgamesh, for example, his relationship is nice and warm. You go, great. That's kind of what I was expecting. And I'm just thinking of others. You've got, is it Kingo?
Kumail Nanjiani's
That's it.
character. Yeah.
So
he's brilliant.
His is brilliant. Yeah,
I did like
totally
his character a lot.
I
love
and
that
it was
Bollywood
so
scene.
much. It was so much fun because he'd basically seen an opportunity to take things he enjoyed and bring them together, and then create a Bollywood empire.
I love those posters of him as his own grandfather and great grandfather. Brilliant.
Yeah, but that was the thing. Those moments were so lightning.
Bollywood Errol Flynn.
Yeah, exactly. They were really good. And what frustrated me is that we actually saw so little of that from Cersei. So we did see some, but it was only in the recent times. There was there's no backstory. We did get she was always the more empathetic one.
She was caring, wasn't she, for the
yeah, exactly. But what would have been really nice is to have kind of delved into that and maybe shown her throughout some of the challenging times for this in the growth of the world, and be able to show the effect it's had on her or things like that. They just didn't show it. They just didn't do that at all.
They made that assumption almost, didn't they? Really?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the problem. Whereas at least with Thena's role, when you were thinking about her going, she's not very open to people. There's a backstory that might explain that, and she might be a bit unsure about who she is and what is real and what isn't. And again, could have been fleshed out more, but at least I could understand that. But for others, it was just missing. And so Ajak, for example, that was a good example. Salma Hayek played it well, but it wasn't a big part of the film at all. I think
that was the least fleshed out role of all the characters. Yeah, I think.
And particularly for someone who literally is steering the team, and steering it in a completely different way, we wanted to see some more of that, and we just didn't. We just saw her as the kind of captainy one a couple of times, and that was it.
Almost fridged in this film, wasn't she? Really?
Yes. Yeah, I'd agree with that. Yeah, it was a bit disappointing, because then the problem is that you find out that people, as we go through the film, people die, and you're not emotionally invested in them. No. You just kind of go, oh, that's a shame.
There was no punch.
I kind of wanted to know about them. Yeah. No, exactly, and I think that's a real pity, because it would have given a lot more weight to the film, and But I understand, like, literally, if you're taking the source material and the time frame and you're trying to make that into a coherent film, it's just not really enough time, and that kind of did show. But yeah, so I honestly, I think the because you've got 10 characters that all got different aspects, I do think there's a lot of interest there and there's a lot of stuff. We just didn't have enough time to go through it.
I will explain my rationale of how I think they could improve this later on. But
Okay.
generally speaking, in terms of the plot, how did you feel about the story and the way it twisted and turned? What your
So
feelings?
honestly, I really enjoyed it. So I thought that the plot was good. I honestly, you're not expecting Shakespeare or something from a Marvel film,
No.
but it was clear that there was a reason why they were there. It was obvious that they had certain elements that would kind of be good for the world. So yes, I can the technology guy could do that.
Was it Phaistos?
Piece, Festos, yeah, Fastos. That's it.
Yeah.
Which was brilliantly acted, by the way. I
Yeah,
really
he was
enjoyed
very
him
good.
as well.
That was
but you can
Brian
understand.
Tyree Henry, wasn't it? The guy who played him.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, he was really good, and you can understand, and even little pieces like Sprite being able to conjure stories and create mythologies and reasons for people to follow them, and that again, these are all strengths that kind of help build the human race and put it into the right place. So you can see all of those benefits, which was nice. And so from a plot line point of view, it was like, yeah, okay, we've covered that. That's good. Yeah, I can see the benefit of everyone. Okay, we've got a clear enemy in the deviants. Yes, I can see what's going to happen. And so honestly, on paper, that reads really nicely. And I think it meant it was an enjoyable watch, even if it was long. It didn't feel like things were dragging too much. So I think I did find it enjoyable. What about you, John? What did you think?
I mean, I do agree with you in terms of the pace. I thought they paced it quite well, and that was the challenge. And I do also agree with you that I think I would prefer to see this as a series, a Disney Plus series.
Yes.
I think the challenge is to not make it another Heroes, which we know happened to Heroes, but I think they could have spent more time on developing the characters in the TV series. I think it would have gone down really well. The trouble is, of course, is you're reaching the limits of budgets for this as a series with the epic events, and that would be a tricky bit of it, really. Who knows? I don't know.
I think it's difficult because the thing is that when you have this as a film, you have to, it has to have a certain amount of gravitas.
The set pieces,
and
really.
So you need the set pieces. You need all of the, very CGI heavy fight scenes. You need all of that. And I think actually you probably could have filmed it cheaper and shaved elements off. And I honestly think you wouldn't have noticed. And you could have just as easily made these half-hour shows. You could literally have done pretty much the same amount of filming, cut it in if you'd have adjusted the plot and the screenplay to make it work better. You could have very easily cut this into 30-minute, easily digestible. Each episode has a focus character, and you learn about them whilst something happens. And I think you could have done that, bridging the 7,000 years reasonably well. You wouldn't have, the jumping between things might have had to work a bit, but it would have worked. And I think we would have just had a little bit more depth because they wouldn't have tried to be so ambitious with some of the visuals and things. They would have focused a little bit more on the characters, and I think that would have just made it a stronger proposition.
Yeah, I mean, I did enjoy it. I didn't see the twist coming, which was nice.
No,
I mean, I could sense something was up. There was definitely a sense of foreboding, and they dropped hints here and there, didn't they? With Ajax saying, "Well, don't tell the others," blah blah blah.
Yes,
I really enjoyed the diversity of the film, and I think it's great to see Marvel and Disney making the steps to, inclusivity in films. Great to see a main character as the first deaf superhero, the first superhero openly gay couple in a superhero film. In fact, that gave it an 18+ rating in Russia. That relationship,
did it? I love the fact that there was a good amount of subtitles, partly for the deaf character, but also
for language.
When they were talking in different languages. I felt that was appropriate,
rather than sort of Nazi speaking with a German accent like that.
That's it. Yeah, exactly.
Film. Yeah,
it really did feel like, okay, you get this, and that's one of the things that warmed me to the film. Actually, was just that attention to detail really helped.
Yep.
And so it meant that. For example, the scene with Fastos and his partner and the little boy Jack, Fastos and Ben is. So that was charming, but it wasn't cheesy, and I felt like it felt really genuine. And what was nice about that is it then didn't become a token moment. It became now of course we see he's met someone, he's raising a family. And so that way, sexuality didn't really matter. It wasn't. That wasn't important.
Normal. It was just a normal.
And this is normal, it. Yeah. So I really liked that because it made it feel really genuine. And so that's why I struggled a bit when it was like you had these really nice bits, and then you flipped on the other side, and then you had the CGI heavy set pieces, and it did feel like they were different directors and different shows.
Well, I mean, there wasn't a massive use of digital environments, though. I mean, there was a lot of CGI for all the fighting and so on, but Chloe Zhao's not a big fan of green screens, so a lot of this was done practically. So
I find that interesting because it didn't feel that way. It felt
a bit artificial looking, didn't it? I know what you mean.
I felt like
a bit too crisp and polished almost.
Yeah, completely. Yeah. I felt like. And maybe that was just, I don't know, lighting and how the characters were acting, and maybe there wasn't enough, sort of environment for us to feel grounded. But because we dipped into things so quickly, it really, some of it really felt just like pure CGI. South Dakota didn't, felt like a set. Obviously, it was, but that's not the point.
Yeah.
But even like when they went to Alaska, I think it felt super CGI, and I think that's what took me out of the fact that I'm trying to ground myself in the characters and the situations they're in, but when they jump to another place, they didn't give it time for me to kind of go, oh, you're here, oh, okay, why are you there, what's going on. Instead, it was very much, no, we've got a minute, 90 seconds to do this scene, we've got to do it super quick.
Shot with lots of sort of halo sun effects and dust blowing. And,
that's it. I mean, and it didn't feel real. It felt like over processed.
The problem is we're entering an era where there's so many useful tools to make films, and they can be very polished, that we're almost losing that graininess, the rawness of film that you see in a lot of more lower budget films. I'm yet to see Edgar Wright's new film. Last Night in Soho.
No, I've not seen it.
Which I'm desperate to see because I do like Edgar Wright's filming style, and I think he's much more of a very stylistic and get down and dirty. And for me, again, not a major concern because you expect this with Marvel. It just felt like almost so produced it could have been made. It could have been a TV series. I don't know why that sounds weird. It just seems it felt a bit featureless in some scenes. It's just a bit too shiny and blank. If that makes sense. It's really hard to pin down. But since we are starting to pick it apart, let's talk about some of its other flaws. We need to address the big sexy elephant in the room.
Oh my god! Oh, so I
such a PG scene.
I need a bucket.
PG-13 anyway.
This is awful. So the sex scene was so bad.
Well, it's the first Marvel sex scene.
It is the first one.
It gave it a PG-13 rating.
They had so many other areas where they were so sympathetic, and they had obviously put attention to detail to make sure that things were done sensitively. And then this didn't feel like that at all. And I think part of that has to be the chemistry between the two characters, so two actors. So I think Gemma Chan and Richard Madden didn't have any chemistry.
No.
They also didn't have any time to get chemistry, which was, I think, the bigger problem.
Which is the biggest irony, considering they've been together for 5,000 years or whatever it was.
This is the challenge, and I understand. Like, yes, Icarus is a role playing a bit of a Superman role. Yes, he might be, a bit over the top, but if you're going to be close to someone for that
on the
length
top
of time,
is the word, actually. Right.
Yes, that's true. Oh no, don't make me think about it. It's just, it's so cringe. And I think
you either go for
undid.
it and make it an older film, which is a real challenge for Marvel with all its younger fans, or you don't, or you just reference it in passing without kind of. I mean, you've got the sort. It felt like the sort of gauzy Top Gun sort of sex scene where it's all very stylized, but you don't. And I'm not saying I want to see it all. I'm just saying it doesn't know what to do with itself, does it? This sex scene. It's sanitized for a younger audience. It felt like when your younger sister gets her Barbie doll and a Ken doll, and sort of you push them together quickly. It felt a bit weird.
So I don't want to go into mechanics because I don't think this is that kind of podcast.
No.
But the thing is, like, there was thrusting that wasn't needed. Like, why couldn't they just do embraces and kissing and just being close? And we would have warmed to that more because we would have been like, oh, okay, they are a couple. That's nice.
To see the afterglow,
yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
In fact,
whereas
do
actually,
you know what?
Go on.
I mean, I'm going to reference Bond here, but there's a scene in Bond where the next morning, Bond's got up and Madeleine's lying in bed, and she's lying on her front, sort of dozing in the morning. They've obviously had a steamy night, and she's lying on her front, so you don't see anything, but she's got an incredibly sexy naked back on the bed. He gives her a kiss and walks out, and that felt 1,000 times sexier and natural and believable than two, which we now know as robots bumping uglies briefly in this featureless environment with glinty music somewhere on a spaceship somewhere, or next to a spaceship in the rocks or whatever it is.
Well, this was the irony was that they were in a sandy desert, which is possibly the worst place to do that. And the whole thing is literally they would have him stand behind her with his arms around them, and then all of a sudden that would do it. And there was nothing else. There was no
moves,
lead up. It was literally just like, bam.
Yeah.
And then they just cut straight to... And there wasn't even like a shower scene or anything. So it was kind of really was...
Wash off some of the sand.
What is going on? And the thing that makes that weird is we then had no comparison either. We didn't have like a warmth of a relationship with Kit Harington's character either.
Dane Whitman.
So it was... Yeah, that's right. So... Yeah. Hugely frustrating. But anyway, I need to cleanse now.
Yes.
I need to put that behind me because otherwise I won't be able to let it go. So you carry on.
Well, anything else that you want to nitpick in this particular section of our podcast? We talked a lot about the character development, haven't we? Really?
Yeah, I think the thing for me, I found that the fights were rushed, so that all of the set pieces did feel like. They were fast, and the thing is, because they were so fast, and because you knew that there wasn't many consequences, at least at the start, it wasn't very engaging for me. I just didn't find it's just lots of fast moving CGI.
Really, let's be honest.
Yeah. I do think the thing is, you put it next to something that's much more thoughtful about its fight scenes, and then you just see the huge difference between them.
Yeah.
And it's not a martial arts film or anything like that, but it just, again, it's the kind of thing that could have worked. There was a really good scene, though. There was a really, really good scene, which was when Cersei was pushed under the water and then turned the deviant into a tree.
Yeah. That was cool.
So that I was like, brilliant. That's really good. But that was literally the best thing out of the film. There were a couple of bits that came almost there, but it was just like I would have liked more individual wins rather than just like, oh look, Icarus has got his eyes out again. You know, it just didn't feel
a little
like
bit of imagination with what they could do with their powers, I suppose.
And you could see that they tried, like they really did. Like Gilgamesh, they gave him a little scene, and you can. So I felt like they were trying, but somewhere along the line, it was like they got the B team, and they just needed to talk to whoever manages the A team from that, and who could have said, no, don't do it like that. Do it this this, and it would have worked better. But
let's talk about the deviants, because you mentioned deviants. I felt really sad about the deviants because they're quite a tragic character anyway in this film, the species, when you discover exactly why they've been created. And I really liked where they were going with Crow, who was the sentient one that was played by Bill Skarsgård, wasn't it? Actually, there we go. Pennywise a Cloud in a Marvel film. There we go. I thought that was a really cool character, and I liked his story of him getting more and more sentience, and this kind of sort of revenge for his species. And I felt really sad that he just went nowhere. They went nowhere with his character at all. And in fact, if you look, when you watch the trailers, and the trailers showed him sort of getting his tendrils out on Athena, and I was really excited to see. I thought he was the big bad, really. And I guess they teased that to us to throw us off the twist. But I just felt they could explore that further, and it just felt like almost like a waste of time, a pointless storyline. I was more interested in seeing where the deviants went, and these people being born inside the planets, these big
the Celestials.
And again, this. So I'm sure there's plenty of hot takes about this, but this whole storyline of suddenly, right, Brian Cox was wrong, and Einstein was wrong, and Carl Sagan was wrong, and the whole universe has not been created from a big bang, but basically it's an incubation center for big gods. And as someone who's never known about these really, we obviously there were hints at it with Guardians of the Galaxy, because there's a Celestial in that, wasn't there, as well?
Yes, that's right.
It just felt like. What? So all the planets are just like eggs for gods, and I know it gave a very kind of it rocked everyone's world to realise what was going on, and these superhuman people were actually who were not protecting the Earth, but they were just basically sucking it dry for their space baby. I mean, it's quite a leap of storyline there towards the end, and that was the threat of this thing inside the Earth breaking out like an egg. I felt like it was very hard to relate to this massive thing in the sky, whereas I felt much more like I could relate to the story, this tragic story these creatures created to basically to be destroyed and to be prey themselves. And
yes. The thing is, they alluded to that as well. Like Crow actually mentions it, doesn't he, towards the end?
Yeah.
We're not the bad guys. We're created by the same people as you. And it's like, so they have all of the, they have all of the bits. They just aren't focusing on all of the right things. So it became, what can you do to... Yeah, it did. It ended up saying, how are we going to stop Icarus? Oh, look, there's Crow. Oh, hello, Crow. Oh, you're a bit different. Why's that? But we didn't, they didn't delve into it. And when they had that moment with Thena in the cave, all of a sudden there's this extra weight of actually, he's taking on the traits and possibly memories of the Gilgamesh. Other Eternals. Yeah, like Gilgamesh. And it was like, oh, that's interesting. But again, that was right at the end of the film. Whereas actually, we could have had something a bit more from, Ajak sort of mannerisms or things. There were lots of ways of introducing this stuff. And they just didn't do it. It really was sort of an oversight, an overlooked character. I think maybe they were fridged.
Yeah, I mean, I did feel very, very slightly what a risk to take to actually have all of your main characters that you're trying to get sympathy with to be revealed as automatons, as robots. It's a weird one to feel, because I'm watching another TV series at the moment where they have a character that's a robot in it, and I really, really sympathise with this character, the Foundation series.
Yeah.
And that series has done a really good job of you really, really feeling for this character that's not human and not as a robot. Whereas I just felt a little bit like, I don't know, it just kind of took away a little bit, especially when you realise they are clones, are copies, millions and millions of times over.
Yeah.
It's just
I think
it's weird.
It's just weird, isn't it?
Yeah. It's a weird story.
I do think, and that's I think that's the thing. It's like,
out there.
Again, it could have been explained, they talk about wiping their memories. Well, why is that? Oh, because you get too invested after this period. Or, there are ways of explaining that. But instead, literally, we just get, essentially an army of robots that they
disseminate
Cersei sees at some point, and that's what they use to just do their bidding. And then not seeing enough character development just helps reinforce that. And you can't get close to them if you keep having all these messages that actually no, they can't grow emotionally.
But on the other hand, I also felt really like, surely Cersei has the same crisis of faith every time this happens.
Yes.
Surely there's been an occasion before where she's rebelled against the Celestial, because if she's a copy, it's in her very, and she's meant to be this empathic character, it's in her very nature to take the side of the species on the planet rather than the big space babies inside the planets, the Celestials. That's
where Mad Weary comes in.
Yeah.
But the thing is, again, they have all of the pieces to explain this at the right time, and they do explain it, but they don't show it in a way that could have really addressed this. So maybe if they'd have literally, had that challenge, that conflict, that sort of crisis of confidence, if they'd have shown that from Cersei, for example, and then she's reset, then it would have been
sort of
okay.
Flashback where it's happened before, you mean?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They could have easily done that, or just to kind of say, oh, okay, so Mad Weary is kind of what happens if they've been doing this too long. Oh, I wonder what's going to happen. But there's tons of ways they could have made it work and be rich.
Again, I think they've had to cut away a lot of this, haven't they, to make this film not too over long.
I think a lot has gone on the cutting floor.
Yeah. Well. So speaking of sort of the construction of the film and how it looks, how did you feel about the cinematography and the soundtrack?
So honestly, it was really polished. So I honestly thought it was, and this is the thing, apart from what I thought was heavy use of, digital environments and processing, but aside from that, it was really well shot, and that was nice. It was like the only thing I think was the poor CGI, and what I mean by that is that it's just
the physics of the bodies being thrown around, like the Wakanda fight problem.
That's it. They didn't have to think about that, so they didn't, and I felt like that kind of we all lost a bit from that. And
which is why Shang-Chi is so good, because they're using real bodies throwing around, most of the time. Whereas this, you're right. When Cersei gets thrown into a wall, you can tell it's just a cartoon being thrown into the wall, basically.
Yeah,
so you feel a bit less concerned about the fights.
That's it. And I think because Icarus is so based on Superman, it kind of, there was no thought about how he flew. It was just like, just get him over there.
Really weirdly, didn't they? They flew kind of vertical the whole time, like they're hanging from coat hangers the whole time. It was, again, they're trying to keep it different to, DC superheroes, I guess, and the way they move and so on. But
the thing is, the weird thing was that when you talk to Chloe Zhao about this, she was very much like, oh yes, this was very much influenced by that, by Zack Snyder and
Zack.
Then you're like, sorry, Zack, so you just think to yourself, well, yeah, but do it properly.
Yeah.
I think that was
pretty low benchmark
my
for it to improve on, isn't it? Really, if you're comparing it.
Yeah,
respects, but
it's anyway. So I think that was the thing. I mean, the soundtrack was great,
Yeah.
and again, the visuals were great. So I didn't have any real problems with that. It was just there were key bits that just were like, oh, that's kind of spoiled it. But honestly, when you look at this on paper, it's a really pretty well polished
But we're nitpicking,
story.
aren't we? I mean, we really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
We're just going really deep. But I mean, there's so much that could have been done with it, which doesn't matter because it's still an enjoyable film. That's what we're trying to say, isn't it, basically?
I think it is, but I think I thought I'd managed my expectations when I went in, because I thought to myself,
we heard before, didn't we?
Don't get your hopes up. And also, when the reviews came back really poor, I was like, I just set my expectations just so I'm not disappointed. And I think what was a challenge was I looked at the material they had. They obviously have challenges fitting it into a film, but I just thought, okay, with a bit of work, this could have been a better film.
Yeah, and they've also had the high bar of the Avengers films. They've also had the challenges of COVID. I'm not sure how many challenges affected this film.
Yeah.
When it finished filming, I think it finished filming before the pandemic. Well, I could be wrong. I enjoyed the look of the film, despite it being a bit sort of over polished. I do like the soundtrack a lot. In fact, I've been listening to it in the car driving. It makes driving really epic when you drive up, long drives.
Nice.
To get a bit nerdy, this is the second film that's actually been released in 4K natively rather than being downscaled. So this and Black Widow are you watch it in 4K. All the other films have been released in a sort of 1442K version.
Oh,
I wonder if that's what really made us feel like it was almost over sharp and polished. I don't know. We're just so used to seeing it in lower quality and just our eyes adjusting. The composer of the soundtrack, Ramin Djawadi, I know him very well. In fact, I can recognise his sound when I listen to the soundtrack. So he wrote the Game of Thrones soundtrack and the Westworld soundtrack. Mm-hmm. And actually, he was involved in the soundtrack for the original Iron Man. So he was the very, very first Marvel composer, which is really interesting.
That's good.
So yeah, I think the soundtrack's really good, and the Eternal theme is actually a cracking track. They have done a really good job of making all the soundtracks for all the different, the themed films, the Guardians of the Galaxy films. They've been very careful with the music, and I think Guardians of the Galaxy is the high bar that's been set really for soundtracks. You can't really go beat that. It's so good. But I do think it's it captures that kind of epic, Ben-Hur style sound of the past they live in, the Greek, the historical aspect. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I've got a quick question for you.
Yep.
While we're talking about cinematography and stuff. So did you see it in IMAX or normal?
I saw it in normal. Okay.
That explains a bit, because I'm just looking at some of these tips and trivia on the IMDb.
Yeah.
And it basically says that the IMAX format at 1.9:1 shows a more explicit nudity in the sex scene.
Oh.
And, which explains
Did you see that?
Well, I did see that. That was I couldn't unsee it now. But now that I know that, so yeah, maybe when you're watching this on Disney Plus,
they're releasing they're issuing them all again in IMAX size, aren't they?
So what they've done is they've issued they've basically, I think it's 8 or 12 of them are now at an IMAX format, which is 1.9:1. And that means that essentially, instead of it being
black bars,
the black bars, you have small bars, but it's almost 2:1, which is what the normal widescreen ratio is. And so I watched Shang-Chi again recently in IMAX.
And do you get the option to see either or is it defaulting?
Yes,
you do.
So what happens is that it defaults to the IMAX version because you see more, but there is a versions option in the.
Why would you watch the other version then?
Well, I don't know if I want to see more of that sex
scene.
Well,
if you're watching it with your kids, people, ladies and gentlemen, then watch it in the standard version because the black bars effectively are like sort of sellotape over the naughty bits.
That's it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think what I might do is just sort of ask my daughter, "Oh, can you get me some popcorn at a specific moment?" Yeah. and then by the time they come back, which will be a good minute or two.
Well, my kids make puking sounds whenever they see kisses in film, so they'll just leave if that happens. It's not a problem.
Yeah.
Although,
that's fair enough.
Obviously, folks, if the scene is inappropriate, you shouldn't watch it in front of your children.
No, that's true.
Okay, so
anyway, go on. Sorry.
Next steps. I mean, obviously, there are a couple of post-credit scenes, and there's several references within the film, especially at the end, to the next film. So
we should talk about that. Yeah, we should definitely go into that. So I thought what was interesting about this was that they're quite closely tied to the film, where they're not just it. Sometimes some of the post-credit scenes are really they're really loose. They're not really tied to what you've just watched. They're really just teasers for the next thing. And I think what was nice about this was it showed the storyline is going to continue, and they thought about it. So the mid scenes with Pip and Eros introduced.
So these well-known characters to a lot of people in the comics.
So they will be, if you're familiar with Eternals,
right.
The Eternals comics, because they are in there as quite well-known characters.
Because Pip was a bit of a jarring character when he arrived. I thought, what's going on there?
This is the weird
it's like
thing.
Seeing Howard the Duck, isn't it, at the end of Guardians of the Galaxy, whatever it was.
Yeah. Well, this is it, and basically between Pip basically being a bit debauched, and then Eros, his power is basically sort of pleasure.
Well,
so
god of is he like Bacchalius? Is he sort of the god of wine and good
times? Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So he is very much like that, and we'll find out back.
He's the dude at Piccadilly Circus, isn't he?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. But that's the thing. So it's kind of, to have them introduced was a bit weird, given that I didn't know about them until I saw some stuff afterwards about it. But it was clear that, okay, so they're going to help them go and get the missing Eternals back. Yeah. Oh, cool! I can see how that's going to work now. And so I did quite enjoy that, because it was clear that they hadn't just wrapped up the film and then just added something on at the end. It gets you thinking about what the possibilities are. Yeah,
is Eros Thanos' brother?
Yes.
And from what I've discovered from reading about Eternals, Thanos has been made from deviant DNA as well. So
technically, Thanos is a celestial.
Oh, right.
No, okay. He's not a celestial. He's an Eternal.
Right. So is he part robot then?
Well, that's what's not particularly clear. I think, and that's the bit that, they're in the comics, there'll be something. If Mark was here, he could tell you all about it. But so we need to do a bit more work to find out. But I think it's clear that he's an Eternal, which is why he has more power. And I think Eros is connected to him in some way. Yes, they're brothers, but I don't know whether that's a formal thing or whether it's, I don't know exactly how that works.
Also, here's the rabbit hole. If Thanos is going to snap and remove half the universe, that's half of those planets losing the people on them to power up the Celestials. Yep. So wouldn't that have caused problems as well? Wouldn't they stepped in to sort out Thanos before he did that then?
There are some pet theories about this, because I went into a big rabbit hole on this with Screen Crush, which is a YouTube channel that basically is very geeky and goes through lots of this stuff. And so basically what they said is, it's quite possible that Thanos was actually trying to stop the Celestials being born by limiting the population.
So he's being a good guy.
Yeah, which again, that's a bit mind-bending, but and so then they talked. So we talked a little bit about that, and so that also explains why when they click their fingers, none of the Eternals get gone, because they're obviously not really they're not really human. They're not people as such. But so I think that's kind of a really interesting. I just don't think they'll go that way, because it'll just you can't really retcon the biggest thing that you did in the Marvel universe for so long, and you can't just retcon that and go, oh no, he was actually a good guy after all. I think that I don't think that would work whatsoever. But there's some interesting elements there.
The other query I have is, of course, the multiverse.
Yes,
and how that's going to relate to all this.
I don't think it does at the moment.
No,
though. I think. Go on.
Well, I think the multiverse can stay separate because it's a multiverse, can't it? I suppose.
Yes,
and that's what
yeah.
I think. That's what they're doing. They're going to be able to almost have parallel storylines for all their different, IPs for these, which is very clever financially for them as well, isn't it? But
how convenient.
So there's another post-credit scene,
yes.
which I think I enjoyed more, really. Which with Dane Whitman, who hints at something when he's talking to Cersei, isn't he, at the end? Actually, my family are rather special too, he says. Obviously played by Kit Harington.
Yes.
And so he's opening up this box, and I think what's inside is it the ebony blade?
Yeah, I believe so.
And the ebony blade, interestingly, is the kind of the counterpart or nemesis of Excalibur. And they find Excalibur, don't they, when they go back and find Pip. Not Pip. Who was the young character? What was her name? Chip? Pip?
Oh, Sprite.
Sprite, that's it. So she was sitting there waiting for, wasn't she? Or was it Makari?
No, it wasn't. It was Makari, yeah. So,
Makari was sitting in all this sort of
Makari,
like historical junk, wasn't she, in books and things? And in there,
she was essentially the collector.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Makari is reference to Mercury, isn't it? The god of speed. But she's sitting there, and then I think Thena picks up Excalibur. And Excalibur famously is the counterpart to the Ebony Blade. So that's interesting. And this whole story. Do we feel that perhaps that Dane Whitman could be a descendant of King Arthur? Is King Arthur referenced in the Marvel universe here? Is he a character, or is it a different storyline completely? I mean, it's been confirmed that the voice that you hear is Mahershala Ali, isn't it? Mahershala Ali, the new actor for Blade. I hope I've said his name right. So this is a reference to Blade. So I'm struggling to understand the link between the Ebony Blade, Excalibur, and vampires and daywalkers and things. This is where we really need Mark. But can you help me out with this? Have you been watching?
Yeah. So basically, the way it's meant to work is that. So basically, Merlin gave the enchanted sword to Sir Percy of Scandia,
Scunthorpe,
who was like Scandinavia, but without Scandia.
Yeah.
And so essentially, he was the first Black Knight, and Dane Whitman is a descendant of Sir Percy, and so that's why he talks a little bit about
family.
I've waited and family and that kind of thing, and so that's the thing, and it's been something that has been in his family for a long time. But yeah, so we do think he's going to be Black Knight. And
is Black Knight a mate of Blade then?
Yeah. No. So they're different. So Blade is. I was going to say, so Blade is.
There's no mythology of Blade. Blade was just a sad.
But he was the Daywalker, wasn't he? He was the vampire
who attacked a pregnant lady and he survived. Yeah.
So exactly. So that's him.
But I'm trying to think what the link is between him and Black Knight. Just contemporary heroes.
There isn't a set link, but I think the way that it's going to work is that they're queuing up a series of essentially the darker Avengers. That would be, so they'll be the ones that they're not the B team, but you know what I mean. They're doing
the Suicide Squad. Basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they're trying to build that in, and so that's why we're getting things like there's Moon Knight, which was a TV series.
Is that Oscar Isaac's film?
I think so.
There's been a teaser trailer for that, isn't there, this week as well? I think.
Yeah. And so there's that. There's going to be a Blade series. Eventually, I assume that there'll be probably a TV show for Black Knight that will probably follow Eternals 2, and so you can see that they'll then maybe they'll come along to wrap it all together, and then that will become the end of phase 5 or whatever it is. But that's their thinking, and then they'll have to reopen Avengers and
God, Lord, I mean, stuff. It's a steamroller, isn't it, of storylines, and there's got to come a point surely where superheroes don't become the fashion anymore, and they move on. But I don't know.
I think the thing is, because Disney now has Disney Plus, they've got another channel that they can go straight to on, and so I think that's gonna.
There'll always be.
They need somewhere to come. Yeah, exactly. And so I think that's what they're looking at is, yes, they can still do the traditional blockbusters with the characters that we know and love. They might have some where there's a mix, and they have like Eternals where there's a blockbuster that leads into a TV show, and that crossover might work, and then it will come back later on, and then you just merge them all together at the end of a big blockbuster, 5 years of content.
Eventually, give it 20 years. I said there'll be a Star Wars Marvel Universe crossover where they converge, and then we finally reach the end of time. And speaking of reaching the end of time, I think we need to wrap up there, don't we, Alex?
Yeah.
Do you have anything else to add?
No, honestly, I think we've nitpicked a lot.
Yeah, it's a good film.
I do think it's a good film. I think I was frustrated by its potential, but you've got to just put it into context and actually say, they've tried to do a lot with this film, and a lot of it they've done pretty well. So don't be disappointed about it.
Okay, well, you can find us, the show, at PlayPauseTurn on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @JohnPREvans. Alex, you are?
At Alex Hansford.
And also, you can also go to our website if you need to at playpauseturn.show. This has been Play Pause Turn, and thank you for listening.